The church in Copper Ridge smelled like dust and quiet judgment. Cold October winds slipped through the open doors and wrapped around Elaina Wade as she stood at the front in a borrowed yellow dress that did not fit. Her hands shook around a bundle of prairie roses wilting, while she stared at the floor and counted the boards between her and the door. 12 steps to the exit she knew she would never take. Every pew was packed. Folks who never helped her family now leaned forward, as if they had bought tickets to a show. Everyone in town had heard about the Wade debt and the bank notices. They all knew this wedding was not about love. Across from her stood Clayton Hartwell, the man she was about to marry. He was 34, tall and broad, his black coat pulled tight across his frame, his work-rough hands holding his hat against his chest. His face was hard, and still like the hills outside town. Elaina had braced herself for cruelty when she first looked at him. Instead, she found a deep, watchful calm that made her feel even less sure of anything. The minister's words blurred into one long sound. Months of drought had ruined their crops. The bank had called in the loan. A man named Garrett had ridden up with clean boots and a smooth offer to clear the debt if Elaina married Clayton Hartwell, richest rancher in 3 counties. Her father had cried when he told her, but he signed the agreement anyway. No one had asked what she wanted. The minister spoke her name and the church went quiet. He asked if she would take this man as her husband. Elaina heard her heart pounding louder than his voice. Her tongue felt thick, but she forced the words out and said she would, barely louder than a breath. Then it was Clayton's turn. Everyone expected the familiar reply. Instead, he answered that he would. The small change rolled through the room like a low rumble. Some people shifted on the benches. Elena's stomach knotted tighter. She did not know why it mattered, only that it did. The blessing ended. The minister pronounced them man and wife. The words dropped over her like a heavy bar sliding into place. Clayton turned and offered his arm, not grabbing, just holding it there. Elaina stared at it, half expecting his hand to close around her wrist. It did not. He waited until she laid her fingers lightly on his sleeve. His arm felt solid, but his touch stayed careful. They walked down the aisle through a tunnel of eyes and whispers. Outside, the October air cut sharp against her cheeks. Elaina climbed up with stiff legs. When Clayton's hand brushed her elbow, she flinched. He stepped back at once, said nothing, and gathered the reins. He spoke only a little on the road, voice low and rough. He asked if she was all right. She answered that she supposed she was Mrs. Hartwell now, the new name tasting bitter in her mouth. After that, he rode in silence, turning the team toward the foothills and away from everything she had ever known. The ride to Hartwell Ranch felt longer than the miles. Fields and fences gave way to open land under a wide sky. Elaina hugged her arms around herself and stared ahead. She felt traded, not chosen, like a calf at auction. No matter how kind the buyer, a sale was still a sale. If this story is touching your heart already, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and if you have ever gone through something similar. Also tell me what you would like me to improve in future stories. At the far end of the valley, the Hartwell place finally rose into view. The house was bigger than anything Elaina had ever seen up close. Log walls on a stone foundation and a wide porch facing the mountains. Smoke drifted from the chimney. To someone else it might have looked like promise. To Elaina it looked like a life that was already decided for her. Clayton tied off the team and came around to help her down. Again his hand found her arm, steady and warm, and again he let go the second she stiffened. He gave her a moment, then told her he would show her inside. The front room held a stone fireplace, a rug, a table and shelves with books and carved figures. Everything was neat and plain. He pointed toward the kitchen, where a stove and pump stood ready and the pantry shelves were full. Upstairs he led her to a room with a tall bed and a quilt pieced in blue and cream. A washstand stood near a window that looked toward the distant peaks. On the inside of the bedroom door, a brass lock shone against the wood. Clayton rested his hand on the frame and told her she could use it whenever she wanted. He added that he would not knock unless she asked him to. He checked that she understood. Her throat felt tight, but she managed a nod and a hoarse yes. He stepped back into the hall and closed the door with a soft click. Elaina stared at the lock, then turned it. The metal felt cool and firm under her fingers. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to his boots move away down the stairs. The house settled into a quiet that did not yet belong to her. Hunger finally pushed past her fear. When she opened the door a crack, she saw a folded cloth on the floor outside. Inside were warm biscuits and a small jar of honey. No note, just her name, written on the corner of the cloth in an awkward hand. She carried the bundle inside, locked the door again, and ate while the October wind rattled the window. Downstairs, at a table set for two, Clayton Hartwell finished his supper alone. The second plate stayed untouched, waiting for a woman who was not ready to sit beside him yet. Elaina woke to grey light and the sounds of a house already moving. Boots on floorboards, the faint clink of dishes, the soft groan of wind against the walls. For a moment she thought she was home. Then the tall bed and strange quilt reminded her where she was. Hartwell Ranch. A wife by contract. Her throat tightened as she turned toward the door, ready to check the lock, until she saw a folded cloth on the floor. Inside were warm biscuits and a slice of ham, her name scratched on the corner in a rough, careful hand. She ate standing by the window, watching fog lift off the pasture. The food eased the hollow ache in her stomach, but not the knot in her chest. Voices rose faintly from below. She heard Silas say townfolk were calling her a good bargain. Debt traded for a young wife. There was a pause. Then Clayton's voice came back, steady and hard. He said she was not a bargain. He said she was his wife, and he would not have her spoken of like stock. The words sank deep. No one had ever pushed back for her before. Elaina pressed her palm to the door and let herself breathe a little slower. Later that morning she walked downstairs for the first time. The kitchen smelled of coffee and bread. Sunlight lay across the table where Clayton sat with a ledger open, sleeves rolled, pencil in hand. He looked up, surprised, then nodded toward the chair across from him, and poured her a cup. She sat stiff, holding it in both hands so he would not see them shake. When she finally asked why he had agreed to marry a girl he had never met, he closed the book and rested his arms on the table. He said a stranger had come with an offer, said her family was decent but in trouble, and that this match could help them both. The house was too big for one man, he added, and he was tired of empty rooms. Elaina told him what that offer had meant on her side of town. She spoke of years without rain, of crops that failed, of bank notices lined up on the table. She told him how Garrett laid out the marriage terms, how her father cried and still signed, how no one asked if she was willing to trade her life to clear a debt. Clayton listened without cutting in. His jaw tightened, his hands slowly curled. When she finished, he let out a slow breath and said he had not known. He said he had believed it was fair. He said that when he saw her face at the altar, he knew something was wrong and knew it too late. Then he reminded her of what he had said there. Not that he did, but that he would. He told her he meant that. He would try every day to make this as right as he could. She was his wife by law, he said, but not his property. If she ever chose to leave, he would help her go. The promise did not wipe away what had been done to her, but it cracked the wall of fear inside. That afternoon, a boy from town brought an envelope with the church seal. Clayton read it once, his mouth flattening, then fed it straight into the stove. When Elaina asked, he said the church ladies wanted to hold a welcome gathering for her. He told her they were not going. The fire snapped as the paper curled and blackened. She watched it burn and felt, for the first time, that someone was standing between her and the town, instead of pushing her toward it. That night she closed her bedroom door, but did not set the lock all the way. A narrow band of lamplight from the hall slipped through the crack. Later she heard Clayton's boots on the boards. His shadow paused outside her room for a long second. He did not touch the door. His steps moved on. The choice about that lock had been hers, and she felt it like the first small piece of her life given back. Days fell into a pattern. Clayton rose before dawn to tend the stock and check fences. Elaina filled the kitchen with coffee, bread and stew, learned the stove's moods and the pump's stubborn pull, mended his shirts and folded them at the end of the table. He thanked her in simple words. The silence between them softened, no longer a wall, more like open ground they were slowly crossing. One clear morning, after several days of this quiet rhythm, Clayton asked if she wanted to learn to ride. Not for chores, he said, but because he thought she might like the feeling of it. Fear tightened her ribs, but she found herself nodding. In the yard he brought out a chestnut mare with kind eyes. He showed her how to hold the reins, where to set her feet, how to sit so the saddle would not rub. His hands touched hers only when needed, light and brief. At first she sat stiff, but as the horse walked slow circles under the wide sky, something in her chest loosened. When the mare bumped her shoulder with a warm nose, a small laugh slipped out of Elaina. Clayton smiled at the sound, a real, easy smile that softened the hard lines of his face, and for the first time she did not see a stranger across from her, but a man she might one day choose to stand beside. Autumn settled over the valley in a hard, clear way. Days on the Hartwell place began to follow a steady rhythm. Elaina cooked, swept, and learned where everything in the big house belonged. She and Clayton spoke more at the table now, first about chores and weather, then about small pieces of their lives. The fear that had once filled her since the wedding did not vanish, but it no longer ruled every breath. The ranch still felt strange, but it no longer seemed like a prison cell. One Wednesday, Clayton said he had to go to town for supplies, and told her she could choose to stay or ride along. The thought of Copper Ridge made her stomach twist, yet she was tired of hiding like a secret. She tied her hair back, buttoned her plain dress, and climbed into the wagon beside him. As they rolled toward town, she sat straight and silent, feeling each turn of the wheels. Her hands were damp on her skirt, but she kept her chin lifted toward the road. The town seemed smaller and sharper than she remembered. Men on the boardwalk paused to stare. Women watched from windows and whispered. In the general store, Mrs. Hawkins weighed flour and coffee without meeting Elena's eyes once. Outside, as they loaded sacks, a cowboy with whiskey on his breath leaned on a post and made a crude remark about Clayton's new wife and the price that must have been paid. Heat rushed into Elena's face, and her hands went numb on the grain sack. Before she could move, Clayton stepped between them. His voice stayed low but firm as he told the man that if he had something to say, he could say it to him, not to her. The cowboy's grin slipped. He muttered that he meant no harm and turned away. Clayton told him then not to say anything at all. There was no fight, only a clear warning that everyone nearby understood. On the ride home, Elaina sat quiet with her hands folded tight. She whispered that she was sorry for causing trouble, for the gossip, for being the reason people laughed. Clayton kept his eyes on the road and asked what she could possibly be sorry for. He said townfolk would always talk, and their talk did not change truth. He said what mattered to him was that she was safe and sitting beside him now. She studied the steady line of his jaw and felt something inside her loosen. Cold weather tightened its hold on the ranch. One night Elaina woke and saw a lamp glow on the porch. Through the window she saw Clayton sitting on the steps, shoulders bent, holding something small. The next night, the glow came again. This time she wrapped a shawl around herself and went out to sit beside him. In his hands was a worn photograph of a dark-haired woman with a baby. His voice was rough as he said the woman was his wife Mary, and the child was their son Jacob. Fever had taken them both years ago, leaving the house empty and him alone. Elaina listened in the cold night and told him she was sorry. She asked if he still loved Mary. He said he did, and likely always would, but loving someone gone did not mean the rest of life had to stay empty. He said he cared what happened to Elaina now, and did not ever want her to feel trapped under his roof. The words were simple, but they slid into broken places in her heart. They went back inside when the cold bit too deep, and sat by the fire in a quiet that felt, for the first time, like peace. A week later a folded paper came with the church seal. It was an invitation to a ladies' social. Clayton told her they did not have to go. Elaina almost refused at once. Then she thought of the way those women had watched her in town, as if she were nothing but a story they already knew. She said she would attend. His brow creased, but he did not argue. He only reminded her that she owed them nothing. The church parlor smelled of tea and sugar. Women stood in close circles, talking low. Their voices dropped whenever Elaina walked past. Mrs. Dalton, the banker's wife, reached her first with a smooth smile, and others gathered around. At first they spoke of weather and recipes. Soon the questions shifted. They asked how it felt to marry so quickly, and hinted how lucky it must be to have all debts vanish overnight. Their smiles were tight and hard. At last Mrs. Dalton asked, in a sweet, sharp tone, how it felt to be bought like cattle. Another woman gave a short laugh and said at least Elena's father had gotten a good price. The circle waited for her to blush and lower her head. Instead, something inside Elaina snapped into place. She rose to her feet. Her legs shook, but her voice came clear. She said her father had been desperate, that the land was failing, and the bank had been ready to take everything. She said their husbands would have let her family starve, and called it good business. She told them they were not worried for her at all. They were only cruel, and that was different. Silence fell heavy over the room. Mrs. Dalton gave a thin laugh that no one echoed. Elaina did not wait for more. She walked out of the parlor with her head high, stepped into the cold November air, and started the long road home on foot. Each mile under her boots peeled away one more layer of shame. By the time the Hartwell house came into view, her feet ached and her eyes burned, but she stood taller than she had on her wedding day. Clayton found her sitting on the porch steps with her arms wrapped around herself. Her hands still trembled. He sat beside her and asked what had happened. She told him every cruel word, and every answer she had given back. He did not rage or pace. His face went very still, his eyes dark and steady. He said they would not speak to her that way again. She said he could not control every tongue in Copper Ridge. He answered that maybe not, but he could make sure his voice was louder where it mattered. Then he asked her to trust him. Under the hard November sky, looking at the man she had once feared like a sentence, Elaina felt her answer settle in her chest. She told him she did trust him. For the first time since the wedding, the word trust felt like something she had chosen for herself. For the first time in months, she could imagine a future that belonged to her. That night Elaina did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a small bag at her feet and a single sheet of paper in front of her. In neat lines she had written that she was leaving Hartwell Ranch. She told Clayton it was not because of anything he had done, but because of what the town was already saying, and what more they might do. She thanked him for every gentle thing he had done when he could have claimed his rights, and she ended the letter by saying she could not stand to watch his name dragged down because of her. When the ink dried, she set the letter beside the lamp and tied the bag shut. Inside were only a few dresses, her mother's ribbon, and the small cross her father had given her. She looked at the open doorway and the lock that had once made her feel safe. Now it reminded her how much had changed. At last she bent her head into her hands and cried until a grey strip of dawn showed at the window. At first light she washed her face, picked up the bag and walked back to the table. She meant to leave the letter and slip away before Clayton came in from the barn. Instead she found him already there, standing by the lamp with the paper open in his rough hands. He looked worn, as if he had been up all night. For a long moment, they only stared at each other. Then he set the letter down and told her that if she wanted to go, he would not stop her, because she had been free from the first day. The words cut deeper than anger, and left her standing there with her heart pounding. Her voice shook as she asked him why he had really agreed to the marriage. Not the easy reason about needing help in a big house, but the truth under it. Clayton's shoulders lowered, as if he set a weight aside. He said that when the offer first came, he had thought like a rancher and a businessman, counting acres and debts. But when he saw her at the altar, so young and scared, and still standing as straight as she could, something changed in him. He had been alone a long time, and had hoped that maybe the two of them, both hurt in different ways, could build something better together. Elaina slowly set the bag on the floor. She told him the hardest part was not the gossip in town, but how much she now wanted to stay, and did not know if she had that right. Clayton stepped closer but left space between them, and told her the choice belonged to her now. If she left, he would help her start fresh somewhere safe. If she stayed, they would stand in front of everyone as partners, not as a man who bought a wife and a girl who had been sold. The word partners settled deep in her chest. She picked up the bag, carried it back to her room, unpacked every dress into the drawers, then returned and told him she chose to stay, to choose this ranch and to choose him. Relief moved across his face like sunlight through cloud. He let out a long breath and ran a hand over his jaw. If she trusted him, he said, he wanted to do something that would set things right in front of the whole town. He asked her to give him until Sunday. She looked at him and, for the first time, felt calm instead of afraid. She said she trusted him, and the words felt solid and true. Over the next few days he rode into Copper Ridge, met with the banker, the sheriff, and a lawyer from the next county. Papers went back and forth, signed and stamped, and for once, she knew they were about her, not against her. Sunday came clear and cold. The church filled early, and every pew was crowded. For the first time, Elaina sat in the front row beside Clayton, feeling eyes on her back. Before the minister could begin, Clayton stood. In a steady voice he said he knew what people had been saying, that some believed he had bought himself a young wife along with her father's debt. He told them the only thing he had paid for was that debt, $800 that had kept the Wade land from being taken. Then he held up a folded deed and said that the day before, he had signed over 200 acres of Hartwell land to Elaina, with water and grazing and timber rights, all in her name alone. A wave of surprise moved through the room. Clayton went on and said she could leave any time she wished now, she could work that land, sell it, or let it lie wild. It belonged to her, not to him. He said she was not his property, she was his partner, and he expected everyone in Copper Ridge to treat her with the respect any woman deserved. Then he sat down and took her hand where everyone could see. Elena's knees shook as she stood, but her voice came out steady as she told the town she had come to that altar, with nothing but a worn dress and fear in her bones, that Clayton had given her shelter and safety and, more than anything, a real choice, and that she now stayed because she wanted to, choosing him every day as much as he chose her. For a long moment the church stayed silent. Then Mrs. Porter, the oldest woman in Copper Ridge, slowly rose and admitted she had judged them both, and was sorry. A few others nodded, some wiped at their eyes, some still looked away, but their opinions no longer felt like chains. As Elaina sat down again, her fingers wrapped around Clayton's hand, she felt something heavy lift from her shoulders. Spring came early that year. Snow pulled back from the hills, and clear water ran in the creeks. Green shoots pushed up through the soft ground. The tulip bulbs she had planted by the path broke the soil in bright colors. One mild afternoon she planted young apple trees on the land that now carried her name, and when Clayton said those trees would take years to bear fruit, she smiled, and answered that she was not going anywhere. Later they walked the fence line together. Clayton asked if she wanted the rails taken down so their acres would run together. Elaina shook her head and said the fence helped her remember that what lay on the other side was a life she had stepped into by choice, not something forced on her. He looked at her with quiet pride and said he was proud of both of them. She rested her head against his shoulder for a moment, and said she was proud too. That evening they went back to the house as the sky turned gold and then deep blue. The porch light glowed warm against the dark yard. Once that doorway had looked to her like the mouth of a cage. Now it looked like home. When Clayton asked if she was ready to go inside, she smiled and said she was, and they walked through the door together side by side, leaving it open behind them. In that house where fear had once filled every corner, love had taken root in small, steady ways. It grew in bread baked before dawn, and in doors left unlocked, in land freely given, and in choices made with clear eyes. It was not quick or easy, but it was strong. It was the kind of love that lasts, built between two people who had both known loss and had chosen, day after day, to stay. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories that will touch your soul.